Gary Plause. On March 16, 1984, Gary Plause waited at the airport for Jeff Doucet, who had captured his son Jody, then shot him dead as cameras rolled. Jeff Doucet was a 25-year-old local karate instructor and friend of the Plause family. Jeff had abducted Jody Plause in February of 1984. Doucet had been Jody's karate instructor and had been around the family closely for over a year. During that time, Doucet had begun sexually molesting Jody. On February 14, 1984, Doucet captured Jody and drove him across the country from Baton Rouge, Louisiana to a motel in Anaheim, California, where he sexually assaulted and molested him. Police searched the country for Jody, and he was eventually found after Doucet allowed Jody to place a collect call to his mother from the motel. California police raided the motel and arrested Doucet without incident. On the plane ride back to Louisiana, Doucet would confess to officials that he had raped Jody and molested other children. Jody's father, Gary, snapped. He reportedly heard the voice of Jesus telling him that if he didn't kill Doucet, the man would continue to hurt his son and other kids. He drove to the airport where Doucet's plane was landing, hid near some payphones, and waited. When Gary spotted the pedophile, he reached for his gun, spun around, and fired a bullet directly into Doucet's head. Doucet was brought to the hospital, where he later died. After he was arrested, Plause was charged with second-degree murder, but that charge was eventually dropped in favor of a manslaughter charge. Plause pled no contest to that charge and was given a 7-year suspended sentence, 5 years of probation, and 300 hours of community service. Jason Browning. In July of 2014, in Daytona Beach, Florida, Jason Browning left his home momentarily to get some food. When he returned, he said he heard a strange noise coming from his son's bedroom. Upon opening the door, he said he found 18-year-old Raymond Frolander, a family friend, with his pants pulled down performing a sex act on his son. Jason, horrified at what he had just seen, then proceeded to beat Frolander to a pulp. He then called 911 and told the operator what had just happened.
I just walked in and found a grown man molesting, and I got him in a bloody puddle for you right now, officer.
When the son was questioned, he said he had been playing video games, but when his father left to get food, Frolander took him to his bedroom where he molested him and forced him to fondle him. The young boy also told investigators that Frolander had been sexually abusing him for around 3 years, and that he had threatened him that, quote, terrible things would happen if he told anybody about the abuse. Jason spoke out about the incident a week after it happened to a local news crew.
Because I was going to kill him. My son stepped in front of me and saved his life. He just looked at me and said, sir, and he shook his head and said, no. And I just put the knife down. I just wouldn't traumatize him any more than he already was.
Frolander's mugshot went viral. He was left with swollen lips and eyes and a bruised face. Frolander pleaded guilty to charges of lewd and lascivious molestation of a child. By accepting a plea deal, Frolander avoided a life sentence but will be electronically monitored and ordered to register as a sex offender after he gets out of prison. He's going to learn in the next 25 years why I let him live, Browning said after Frolander was released. Andrei Bambursky. On July 10, 1982, Kalinka Bambursky was found dead at home, but it soon became apparent that she had died a long while before, after paramedics realized rigor mortis had set in. However, the plot thickened when her stepfather, renowned German doctor Dieter Krombach, admitted he had injected her with calcium and iron, believing that she had heat stroke. But this raised more alarms because iron and calcium are not usually used to treat heat stroke. Evidence of sexual assault was found during Kalinka's autopsy. It has also been reported that Krombach was present during the autopsy, and he is quoted in the report making medical observations. The autopsy not only revealed injuries to Kalinka's genitals and bruises to her arms, legs, and throat, but the most disturbing detail of the whole thing is that the young girl's genitals, kidneys, and rectum had been removed, meaning further tests couldn't be carried out. The organs were never found. Krombach was initially arrested but was quickly released due to insufficient evidence and returned to work. 3 years after the autopsy, Kalinka's father, Andrei Bambursky, finally received details of how his daughter died and concluded that Kalinka must have been killed by Krombach. But according to German authorities, there wasn't enough evidence against Krombach, and they didn't even question the doctor or his motives. Instead, Andrei's 30-year-long quest to get justice for his daughter began. A German court declined the French authorities' extradition request of Krombach in 2004, stating that the case was closed. Bambursky, concerned that the statute of limitations would run out in 2012, paid several men to abduct Krombach and deliver him to French authorities. On October 17, 2009, Krombach, by then 74 years old, was beaten up by 3 men in his hometown of Scheidig, Bavaria, and driven to Mulhouse, France, where he was left chained to a fence near the police station. He suffered a fractured skull. On October 22, 2011, Krombach was sentenced to 15 years in prison for causing intentional bodily harm, resulting in Kalinka's unintentional death. Krombach served 9 years of his 15-year sentence before he was released on health grounds in 2020. The then 84-year-old died shortly after his release. Andrei Bambursky was put on trial and faced up to 10 years in prison for the abduction of Krombach, but the fact he had brought a wanted man to justice worked in his favor. Despite being found guilty, Bambursky was given a 1-year suspended jail sentence. Brandon Moore. Sean Foster was a neighbor and close friend of the Moore family in Lorena, Texas. He started molesting Madeline Moore when she was just 9 years old. He would grab the child's buttocks and breasts whenever the pair were alone together. His abuse continued over the next 5 years. When she turned 12, he started kissing her, buying her rings and clothes, giving her money, and opening the shower curtain to see her naked. When Madeline turned 14, Foster suggested they try drugs and have sex. Madeline was terrified that he would drug and rape her, so she told her mother, Leon, that Foster had kissed and touched her inappropriately. Leon and her husband, Brandon, went to the police. Officers told them it could take months to investigate the alleged crimes. Brandon, who was also a sexual abuse survivor, couldn't wait for police to bring Foster to justice. He told his wife to take their children to a friend's home, and he took Madeline's phone, pretending to be her, and sent a message to Foster saying he could pick her up for work in 15 minutes. Brandon turned on Madeline's shower, and he waited for Foster to arrive. Foster showed up, let himself in the house, went into Madeline's room, and opened the shower curtain. Brandon attacked him from behind. He attempted to beat a confession out of Foster, and he recorded every detail on his cell phone.
Hey, what the are you doing? What are you doing? I haven't done anything to her. You don't touch a 14-year-old girl! I know you! Stay down! I'm down. Stay! Down. Don't hit me anymore. Don't move until the cops get here and save you from me! Oh my God, you broke my glasses. You're trespassing in my house. Get down! I'm not gonna get down. I'm not gonna touch you. You're not moving. I have to move. I have to go. No, you're staying here until the cops get here. You're through.
In 2016, Foster was sentenced to 55 years in prison. Brandon was not charged for the assault. Eduardo Gallo. In 2000, 25-year-old Paola Gallo and several friends were at her family's weekend home, which was in Tepoztlan, Mexico. As they were relaxing there, several armed men broke into the home and terrorized the group of friends for 2 hours. They stole 2 cars, jewelry, and clothing. They also kidnapped Paola, demanding a ransom for her return. The father, Eduardo Gallo, put together $18,500 and some jewelry. When Eduardo attempted to make the exchange, an unidentified group opened fire on the kidnappers, killing 3 of them. The kidnappers believed that the deaths were the result of an ambush, and they murdered Paola. Eduardo found the investigation into his daughter's death frustrating. There was obvious corruption, and there were also numerous errors. Eduardo realized that the police wouldn't solve his daughter's murder. He closed his consulting firm and turned himself into a novice detective. Eduardo disguised himself as a second-hand clothes salesman to tour villages around the city where he believed the kidnappers had family connections. For the next year, Gallo chased physical leads on the streets and analyzed phone records. Perhaps most ominously, he found in his research that up to 90% of kidnappings are never even reported in Mexico, as those closest to the victim are often terrified to their bones of violent reprisal. Eduardo found the payphone that the gunman was using to keep in touch with other members of his gang. He told police of his discovery, and they set up a trap. Police arrested the gunman, Francisco Zamora Arellano, and he confessed to the murder the next day. Arellano and the other kidnappers were sentenced to 40 years in prison.